Hello, my name's Lizzie. I'm Anglican. In about 3 months' time, I'm going to be moving into a convent ready to become a postulant. And here is a topic that's come up in conversation with a few people. I've definitely come across a few people who feel or have maybe asked the question if nuns are a bit selfish. And I think usually what they're meaning by that is rather than like the kind of nun like Mother Teresa who is out and about helping people, I think they're more talking about the kind of nun who stays in the convent like all day, every day. And I think the reason they're asking that question more is that they're wondering, has that person become a nun just so that they can concentrate on improving or their own spiritual life, or focusing on building up their own prayer life in a kind of self-centered, selfish way. So is that what nuns are doing or trying to do, and is that something that God would even allow?
I will hold your people in my heart.
So let's take the example of a contemplative nun who stays in her convent all day, every day. For a start, she wouldn't be like praying and resting all day. I'm pretty sure she'd have quite a few chores to keep her busy, and I don't think her vows, the vows that she'd made, would be easy to live out. And I also think that the monotony of her days could be like quite hard work in itself. But what about all her prayer time? Is that where she's being selfish? So I'm pretty sure her day would have a structure like the one that I outlined in my video about the different services in a nun's day. So yeah, she'd have time for more informal personal prayer, like what some people might call a quiet time with God. But she'd also have a lot more like formal prayer times throughout the day, and those services would be more about the nuns joining together to praise God, read the Bible, especially the Psalms, and pray for other people in need. And I'm pretty sure that a nun would see that a lot of her prayer life is actually about her praying for other people, and maybe even more specifically on behalf of other people who don't pray or who aren't able to pray. So actually, while you're unable to pray yourself, you're being prayed for and held up spiritually by nuns who are giving a lot more of their day and even sometimes their night to praying for others. To be honest, if this is me speaking personally, if I didn't think that other people might somehow benefit from me becoming a nun potentially, if it was only about me getting into like better spiritual shape for my own sake, like someone who goes like spends hours in the gym like body what do you call it, like body sculpting to look good, like just for themselves, I think I personally would really struggle like to find the incentive, because I just find that when you think that other people are depending on you doing your bit or will benefit from what you're doing, I just find that somehow helps me with doing something more difficult. I suppose a bit like why some people who might need motivation for jogging might offer to be part of a fundraising run or something. Just but when you know that when you know that what you're doing will have an impact on other people, I find it helps. It just gives me more incentive or motivation or something. But okay, so say I did want to forget the world to focus on my own spiritual life in a selfish way. I can tell you that there is no way that I would become a nun to do that, because I just don't think it would work. I wouldn't want the discipline of having to stop my own thoughts and my own prayers about my own life every few hours, to stop and pray the different services. And I think all those services would feel like hard work and a lot of discipline at times and like disruption to my day probably. if I wanted to focus on my own spiritual life in a selfish way, I'd want to choose my own Bible passages to read that most matched what was going on in my life at the moment, and not keep having to read the Psalms that forced me to think about God rather than myself, or that forced me to think about the experiences of different people in our society and around the world. And yeah, if I wanted to be like focus on my own spiritual life in a more selfish way, I'd want to spend a lot of the day maybe writing in my journal or reading books about where I'm at spiritually, not doing things like praying about all the prayer requests for people in need that we'd received at the convent. And actually, if I wanted to focus on my own spiritual life in a selfish way, I'd actually need to somehow push God out of my prayer time too, because yeah, it's not going to work. The whole reason that God heals us and ministers to us is so that we can take our eyes off ourselves and look at others and minister to them, even if it's just through praying for them, if we can't get out for whatever reason. And anyway, the more you grow in love for someone, the more you care about what they care about. So I think it would actually be impossible to spend that long, like genuinely with God, before God took your eyes off your own spiritual life as your main focus, or a kind of like self-obsessed focus, because God always draws us out of ourselves and draws our attention away from ourselves. And I think that's true of every Christian, including nuns who stay in a convent all day, or even hermits, to give an even more extreme example maybe. And that's why it's often the most prayerful, contemplative Christians, and there's lots of examples in history, who end up being some of the most compassionate or socially aware, or this kind of profoundly in touch with the world people on the planet, is because of all their time spent in silent prayer and having God shift the focus, their focus. And a lot of the things that I've read over the years suggest that a sign that you're growing in your spiritual life is that you're less and less preoccupied with your spiritual life and more focused on God and others. And in a way, you become more concerned about the spiritual lives of other people than your own. Like, not that you don't give the right amount of attention to your own life too, but yeah, that focus changes away from yourself. So I'm pretty convinced that if a nun, or you or I, are truly letting God into our prayer times, and I personally think that silent prayer helps us at the most, like genuinely letting God in, all that's going to happen over the years is that same pattern of us gradually becoming increasingly aware of the world and its needs, and us wanting to give ourselves to the world, or pray for it in some way. And I think that over time God would take our focus away from our own spiritual lives and move our focus to the spiritual lives of others. So that's not selfish, that's humility. And if you haven't heard this phrase before, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. Humility is about thinking about yourself less. And that's the kind of humility that I honestly see in a lot of nuns, and probably because of all the time that they spend in prayer.